So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital revolution. The Chicago Teachers Union is allegedly looking for $50 billion in increases in their new contract, and we need to talk about it today. We're first going to go over a background of the Chicago's Teachers Union, then a general overview of a contract negotiation specifically within the collective bargaining agreement, then review of the contract changes and specifically surrounding the enforceability, pay increases, and then ultimately next steps. Let's get right into it. Let's take a look. The Chicago Teachers Union, or CTU, is a labor organization representing teachers, paraprofessionals, and other education professionals in the Chicago public schools system. Founded in 1937, the Chicago Teachers Union advocates for its members' rights and interests, including working conditions, wages, and benefits. It negotiates collective bargaining agreements with the Chicago public school system administration and engages in various activities to support public education and advance educational equity in the city. The CTU has been involved in numerous labor actions and policy debates, often drawing attention to issues such as class sizes, resources for students, and fair compensation for educators. Right now, it numbers about 25,000 professionals in the Chicagoland. With the history out of the way, we now need to talk about negotiating a collective bargaining agreement. The Chicago Teachers Union had a contract with the Chicago Public Schools starting in 2019 and ends this year on June 30th. In preparation for that, they need to begin the bargaining process, which means that first they have to prepare both the employer, such as the school district and the union, Chicago Teachers Union, prepare for negotiations by gathering relevant data, assessing their priorities, and appointing negotiation teams. Then they each make opening statements, presenting initial proposals and outlining objectives. Then they go through bargaining, and that's the process we're going through right now. We need to talk about that. Finally, compromise and concession, which is most important, especially with respect to this one. And finally, ratification, implementation, and ongoing communication. Eventually, that they will need to begin renewal negotiations down the road. So, the typical bargaining process is what you've heard in everything else, right? Start high and then wind up somewhere in the middle. And we're clearly seeing that from the Chicago Teachers Union. Now let's get straight to the demands. I really want to highlight two main things from the demands, and then I'll talk about the pricing itself, what these demands cost. But I found it interesting to first talk about the language used and then the ambiguity of the language and what that means for a collective bargaining agreement. So as you can see here, this one titled 3616 Pension Investments, they want to collaborate and move away from any investments of bargaining unit employees' deferred compensation that are contributing to climate change and, quote, other forces that are harming our students and communities, end quote. Harming our students is so broad and so, it's such a wide-ranging discussion that it could literally, include everything. For example, the batteries that are put into electric vehicles require a lot of mining, a lot of hazardous mining of lithium, et cetera, and there's no reason why these couldn't also be considered to be harming the students. And so this sort of unenforceability of these contracts is absolutely, if I were the public school district, I would think that they're bargaining in bad faith, right? There is no way that this could actually be included in a collective bargaining agreement. There is no way to understand if we're actually successful with this. Consider this line that's going into the contract. It is why all our schools need librarians, especially at the elementary level. This will ensure our students have access to books, all the books their heart desires. I don't think that that's necessarily true, right? There could be books that are not acceptable to these teachers, and I imagine that the teachers would not want them to access it. Quote, the ability to conduct research and the opportunity to read the world without restriction. Now, this is proposed to go into a contract, right? Can you imagine writing this into any contract that you would have ever entered into? There's no way to, validate it. Read the world without restriction means a lot of things, and frankly, not a lot of reasonable things. Simultaneously, this line about bereavement leave is truly stunning. It says bargaining unit employees will also be will be eligible for bereavement leave when a student they taught or worked with dies. Well, God bless. At that point, a 10-year bargaining unit employee could probably take off every day that they worked, right? Undoubtedly, they have a substantial amount of former students And this is in the past tense, right? When a student they taught or worked with dies. And so this could be misconstrued all the way back to, the very beginning of the contract. And that seems like a bit much. Finally, I wanted to highlight some strange changes in the language used. So, for example, there's a line with respect to group life insurance that says maternity or paternity leave that has been changed to parental leave. There's another line in here about coaching. It changes. It says when a teacher, because of extenuating and special circumstances, is assigned to coach, removing teach two activities, and the official season of the first activity has not been terminated, etc. They do that quite a bit. Don't know if that has a special contractual meaning. But last up, we're going to talk about the price of all this. Now, that's really what we're talking about today, ultimately, right? That's the biggest concern for many people because the Illinois Policy Institute says that it's upwards of $50 billion. And I can see where they can get that. For example, one of the lines requires free mass transit for all employees and students in the Chicago public schools. 130 million free CTA tickets, and that's $122.5 million. There's more. I mean, it's pretty substantial in many ways. This proposed contract also wants the school district to use its facilities to shelter homeless Chicago public school families, which would require a custodial team of at least two and a social service staff. And I'm not quite sure how this connects to the Chicago Teachers Union whatsoever. More big hitters include a 9% annual wage increase until every year until 2028, $2,000 per child to migrant families to aid in resettlement, covering abortions and fertility care at 100%, and refraining from obligating teachers to disclose a student's gender identity to their parents. The last one doesn't quite cost all that much, but these things are big hitters in general. These can be very expensive programs that seem more like social programs, not exactly something you would put in a collective bargaining agreement. And I find that ultimately the biggest problem is the politics of it all. The mayor of Chicago is Brandon Johnson, and he was a legislative coordinator for the Chicago's Teachers Union. As of June 30th, 2023, Chicago's Teachers Union had sent more than $2.6 million into Brandon Johnson's campaign. And so far, more than $6 million came from teachers' unions altogether. And ultimately, as someone who, ultimately is responsible for the Chicago public schools, he's being funded money to give these teachers more money, who then will use that money to either buy the next mayor or him himself. And so this political and monetary support is pretty critical to the mayor's campaign and office. And as a result, in addition, he is the person who, ultimately makes decisions with respect to bargaining, and that's a really interesting position for people to be in. And I think it should cause a lot of concern. Ultimately, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson doesn't have anything to lose from giving the teachers union more money. Ultimately, it just comes from the public coffers. And there's no there doesn't seem to be any willingness from the public coffers to stop funding these programs. So it's very possible that the Chicago Teachers Union will be successful. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye, guys.